The barn door creaked open, and there it was. 23 years old, fresh out of reform school with nothing but a bus ticket and a crumpled letter in my pocket. I stood staring at what would either save my life or break what was left of my heart. The envelope had been waiting for me at the group home for months, marked with a return address I did not recognize and a name that made my chest tight. Frank Taylor, my grandfather. A man I had never met, never even knew existed until the day I aged out of the system and someone handed me his final gift. Inside that barn, covered in dust and shadows, sat a 1957 Chevrolet pickup truck. Cherry red paint faded to rust in places, chrome bumpers tarnished, but still gleaming where the light hit them right. The keys hung from a nail driven into the wooden beam above it, like he had just parked it there yesterday and walked away. But Frank Taylor had been dead for 6 months by the time I found his letter. And this truck, this barn, this entire ranch in the middle of nowhere, Montana, now belonged to me. I walked around that truck like it might disappear if I moved too fast. The leather seats were cracked but soft, the steering wheel worn smooth by hands I would never shake. In the glove compartment, wrapped in oilcloth, I found more letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me, all written in the same careful handwriting, all dated over the years I had been bouncing between foster homes and juvenile facilities. He had been writing to me my entire life, and I had never known. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. This story gets wild, and I need you all to stick with me through every twist. The first letter I opened was dated 3 years ago. Dear Matthew, it began. I know you do not know me, but I have been thinking about you every day since your mother died. I am your grandfather, your mother, Sarah's father, and I have been trying to find you for years. The system would not tell me where you were, said it was better this way, but I never stopped looking. I have a ranch in Whitefish, Montana. It is not much, but it is home. And when you are old enough, when you are ready, it will be yours. I sat in that truck for an hour, reading letter after letter, watching my life unfold through the eyes of a man who had loved me from a distance. He wrote about the horses he kept, about the garden my grandmother had planted before she passed, about the room he had kept ready for me just in case. He wrote about my mother, about how proud she would have been, about how sorry he was that pride and stubbornness had kept them apart before she died. He wrote about forgiveness and second chances, and how sometimes the best families are the ones we choose, not the ones we are born into. But that was not where this story began. That was just where I finally understood it. The real beginning was 3 months earlier, when I walked out of the Montana Youth Correctional Facility with a garbage bag full of clothes and nowhere to go. 23 years old, and I had spent the last 4 years locked up for stealing cars. Not because I was a criminal at heart, but because when you age out of foster care at 18 with no family and no money, you do what you have to do to survive. The cars were just transportation at first, a way to get from one dead-end job to another. But eventually the law caught up with me. Reform school was supposed to straighten me out, and in some ways it did. I learned to read better, got my GED, even took some community college classes. But mostly I learned that the world outside those walls was not waiting for me with open arms. When they released me, I had $200 in gate money and a bus ticket to Helena, where a halfway house had agreed to take me for 30 days. After that, I was on my own again. The letter was waiting for me at the halfway house, forwarded from 3 different addresses over 6 months. The social worker, Marie Ramirez, handed it to me with a curious look. She was one of the good ones, had been working with kids like me for 15 years, and she could tell when something was different. You going to open that, she asked, or just stare at it all day? I did not know what to say. The return address meant nothing to me, but something about the careful way my name was written on the envelope made my hands shake. Inside was Frank Taylor's final letter, the one he had written just before he died, along with a deed to 300 acres in Whitefish, and the keys to a life I had never imagined possible. Matthew, the letter said, by the time you read this, I will be gone. The cancer finally caught up with me, but I am not writing to make you sad about a grandfather you never got to meet. I am writing to give you something I should have given you years ago, a home, a place where you belong, the Ranch is yours now, along with everything on it. I know you do not know me, but I know you. I know you are strong and smart and capable of more than anyone has ever told you. Come home, Matthew. Come home and let an old man's regret become your second chance. Marie sat with me while I read it twice, then three times. She had seen kids get letters from family before, usually bad news or empty promises. But this was different. This real, she asked. I showed her the deed, the bank information, the contact details for Frank Taylor's lawyer in Whitefish, Kenneth Phillips, attorney at law, who had been instructed to help me with whatever I needed to claim my inheritance. Marie helped me call Kenneth Phillips that afternoon. He was expecting me, had been waiting for months for me to surface. Frank Taylor had hired him to track me down, to make sure the ranch found its way to me no matter how long it took. Your grandfather was a good man, Kenneth Phillips told me over the phone. Stubborn as hell, but good. He made some mistakes with your mother, things he regretted until the day he died. But he never stopped believing you would come home someday. The bus ride from Helena to Whitefish took 4 hours, and I spent every minute staring out the window at mountains and forests and wide open spaces I had never seen before. I had grown up in cities, in group homes and facilities where the closest thing to nature was a chain link fence with weeds growing through it. This was different. This was like stepping into a postcard, all blue skies and rolling hills and air so clean it hurt to breathe. Kenneth Phillips met me at the bus station. He was older than I expected, maybe 60, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like the kind of man who had never spent a day in jail, never slept in a car, never wondered where his next meal was coming from. But he shook my hand like I mattered, like I was someone worth knowing. You look like your mother, he said. Frank always said you would. We drove through downtown Whitefish in his pickup truck, past shops and restaurants and people who looked like they belonged somewhere. I had never belonged anywhere, not really. Even in the group homes, even in reform school, I was always just passing through, always waiting for the next placement or the next release date. But something about this place felt different, felt possible. The ranch was 20 minutes outside of town, down a gravel road that wound through pine trees and over a creek that Kenneth Phillips said ran year-round. When we crested the hill and I saw it for the first time, I thought there had been some mistake. The house was small but solid, painted white with green trim, and a wraparound porch that looked out over fields and mountains. There was a barn, a chicken coop, a corral with 2 horses grazing in the afternoon sun. It looked like something from a movie, like something that happened to other people. This is it, Kenneth Phillips said. This is home. He handed me the keys and walked me through the house room by room. The kitchen was old-fashioned but clean, with a wood-burning stove and a table big enough for 6 people. The living room had bookshelves full of paperbacks and a stone fireplace with pictures on the mantel. Pictures of people I did not recognize, but who shared my eyes, my stubborn chin, my mother's smile. Frank kept your mother's room exactly the way she left it, Kenneth Phillips said, opening a door at the end of the hall. Maybe that was wrong, but he could not bring himself to change it. The room was frozen in time. Pink walls, a twin bed with a patchwork quilt, posters of bands from the 80s still taped to the walls. On the dresser, a graduation photo of a girl who looked so much like me, it took my breath away. Sarah Taylor, 18 years old, cap and gown, eyes full of dreams and plans that would never come true. Kenneth Phillips left me alone that first night, said he would be back in the morning to go over the legal details, the bank accounts, the practical matters of running a ranch. But for now, he said, I should just try to get used to being home. I wandered through that house for hours, touching things that had belonged to people I had never met, but who were family all the same. In Frank Taylor's bedroom, I found more letters, these ones addressed to my mother. Letters he had written but never sent, apologies and explanations, and desperate attempts to bridge the gap that pride had created between them. In the kitchen, I found a journal where he had written about me, about the day I was born, about the fights with my mother when she wanted to move to California, about the regret that ate at him after she died and I disappeared into the system. He had tried to find me, had hired lawyers and private investigators, but the state had sealed my records. All he could do was write letters to addresses that might not exist and hope that someday I would find my way home. That first night, I slept in my mother's room. It felt wrong and right at the same time, like I was finally where I belonged, but 20 years too late. I dreamed about her, about conversations we never had and hugs I never got. When I woke up, the sun was streaming through windows that looked out over land that was mine. And for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of what came next. Kenneth Phillips came back the next morning with coffee and paperwork. The ranch was profitable, he explained. Frank Taylor had been a good businessman, had contracts with local suppliers for hay and beef, had built relationships that would carry over to me if I wanted them to. The bank accounts had enough money to keep things running for a year, maybe two if I was careful. After that, I would need to make it work on my own. You ever run a ranch before? He asked. I laughed. I had never even seen a ranch before yesterday. Well, Kenneth Phillips said, Frank figured as much, you know. He left instructions, phone numbers for people who could help. His foreman, Dennis Stewart, has been keeping things running since Frank got sick. Good man, knows the business inside and out. And there is a woman in town, Hannah Cox, runs the feed store. Frank said she knows more about ranching than most men twice her age. We spent the morning going over contracts and bank statements and all the practical details of owning 300 acres in Montana. It was overwhelming, like trying to learn a new language while someone spoke it at full speed. But Kenneth Phillips was patient, explained things twice when I did not understand, wrote down phone numbers and names of people who could help. The hardest part was not the money or the contracts. The hardest part was believing that this was real, that someone I had never met could love me enough to leave me everything he had worked for his entire life. Why me? I asked Kenneth Phillips as we sat on the front porch, looking out over fields that stretched to the mountains. Why not sell it? Give the money to charity. Anything but give it to a kid who spent 4 years in reform school. Kenneth Phillips was quiet for a long time. Then he pulled out one more letter, one he had been saving for this moment. Frank wrote this the day before he died, he said. Made me promise to give it to you after you had seen the place, after you understood what he was offering. The letter was shorter than the others, written in handwriting that shook with pain and medication, but still carried the careful precision of a man who chose his words carefully. Matthew, it began, I do not know what kind of man you have become. I do not know if you will want this place, if you will see it as a gift or a burden, but I know that everyone deserves a chance to belong somewhere, to build something that matters, to be part of something bigger than themselves. I failed your mother. I let pride and stubbornness drive her away, and I have regretted it every day since. But maybe I can get it right with you. Maybe I can give you what I should have given her, a home, a family, a place where you are wanted and needed and loved, even if you never knew it. The choice is yours, Matthew. You can sell this place tomorrow and never look back, and I will understand. But if you stay, if you choose to make this your home, know that you are not starting from nothing. You are continuing something that began long before you were born and can last long after you are gone. You are a Taylor, and this is where Taylors belong. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my pocket next to the truck keys. Kenneth Phillips was watching me, waiting for some kind of reaction, but I did not know what to say. 23 years old, and no one had ever told me I belonged anywhere. No one had ever said I was wanted or needed or loved. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I had heard but never learned. I want to try, I said finally. I do not know anything about ranching, but I want to try. Kenneth Phillips smiled and shook my hand. Frank would be proud, he said. And do not worry about not knowing anything. Dennis Stewart will teach you. Hannah Cox will teach you. Hell, half the people in town knew your grandfather and will help you just because you are his grandson. That afternoon, I met Dennis Stewart. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with calloused hands and the kind of deep tan that comes from working outside every day of your life. He had been running the ranch since Frank got too sick to do it himself, keeping the cattle fed and the fences mended and the business running. You Frank's boy, he asked when Kenneth Phillips introduced us. Grandson, I said. Dennis Stewart looked me up and down, taking in my city clothes and soft hands and the general air of someone who had never done a day of manual labor in his life. You know anything about cattle? He asked. Not a thing. Horses? Nope. Farming? I can barely keep a houseplant alive. Dennis Stewart laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. Well, he said, we got our work cut out for us. He spent the rest of the day showing me around the ranch, explaining how everything worked. The cattle were Black Angus, he said, good stock that Frank had been breeding for 20 years. The horses were quarter horses, gentle enough for a beginner, but smart enough to help with the work. The hayfields were planted in alfalfa and timothy grass, harvested twice a year and sold to other ranchers in the valley. It was like learning about life on another planet. Dennis Stewart talked about breeding cycles and feed ratios and market prices like they were basic facts everyone should know. He showed me how to check the water systems, how to repair fence posts, how to tell if a cow was sick just by looking at it. My head was spinning by the time the sun started to set. "You going to be all right out here by yourself?" Dennis Stewart asked as we walked back to the house. "I do not know," I said. "Probably not." He laughed again. Frank said the same thing when he bought this place. 30 years old and did not know a bull from a steer. But he learned, and you will too. Just takes time and patience and a willingness to get your hands dirty. That night, I called Marie Ramirez at the halfway house in Helena. She was surprised to hear from me, had been wondering how I was settling in. "It is like a different world out here," I told her. "Like someone switched my life with someone else's while I was not looking." "That good or bad?" she asked. "I do not know yet. Ask me in a year." She laughed. "You sound different, Matthew. Lighter, maybe. Like you are not carrying as much weight." Maybe I was not. For the first time in my life, I was not waiting for the other shoe to drop, not looking over my shoulder for the next crisis. I was home, even if I did not fully understand what that meant yet. The next few weeks were the hardest and best of my life. Dennis Stewart came by every morning at sunrise, and we spent the days working cattle and fixing fences and learning the 1,000 small tasks that keep a ranch running. My hands blistered and my back ached, and I fell into bed every night, exhausted in a way I had never been exhausted before. But it was good exhaustion, the kind that comes from building something instead of just surviving. Hannah Cox turned out to be a woman in her 50s with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She ran the feed store in town with her husband, Jeffrey Cox, and she knew more about animal husbandry than anyone I had ever met. When Dennis Stewart brought me in to buy supplies, she looked me over like she was evaluating livestock. "So you are Frank's grandson," she said. "He talked about you all the time, you know. No, worried about you something fierce." I did not know what to say to that. It was still hard to believe that someone had been thinking about me, worrying about me, all those years when I thought I was completely alone in the world. Hannah Cox must have seen something in my face because her expression softened. "Frank was a good man," she said. "Stubborn and proud, but good. He made mistakes with your mother, but he learned from them. He would have been a good grandfather if he had gotten the chance." She helped me load feed into the truck and gave me her phone number. "You call if you need anything," she said. Ranching is not something you learn alone. Over the next month, I met more of the people who had known Frank Taylor. There was Julie Wilson, who ran the diner in town and had been feeding Frank breakfast every Saturday for 15 years. There was Ruth Sanchez, the veterinarian who took care of the animals and had helped Frank through more than one difficult calving season. There was Barbara Collins, the librarian who had ordered books on ranching for Frank when he was learning, and who offered to do the same for me. They all knew who I was before I introduced myself. Word travels fast in a small town, and the story of Frank Taylor's long-lost grandson had spread through Whitefish like wildfire. But instead of judgment or suspicion, I found acceptance. These people had loved my grandfather, and they were willing to love me too, just because I was his family. It was Barbara Collins who told me about the town council meeting where Frank had asked for help finding me. "This was years ago," she said, maybe 5 or 6. "He stood up in front of the whole town and told them about his daughter who had died, about the grandson he had never met, about how he needed help tracking me down through the system. Half the people in that room offered to help." Frank Taylor was the kind of man who inspired loyalty. I started to understand why as I learned more about him. Frank had helped Dennis Stewart buy his first house when the bank would not give him a loan. He had paid for Julie Wilson's daughter to go to college when money was tight. He had donated anonymously to the church and the school and anyone in town who needed a hand up. He had been the kind of man who made his community better just by being in it. The more I learned about Frank Taylor, the more I understood the weight of what he had given me. This was not just a ranch. This was a legacy, a reputation, a place in a community that valued hard work and integrity and taking care of your neighbors. And now it was mine to continue or to squander. 2 months after I arrived in Whitefish, I got my first real test. One of the cows, a first-time mother, was having trouble calving. Dennis Stewart and I had been checking on her all day, and by evening it was clear she was going to need help. Ruth Sanchez came out to the ranch with her veterinary equipment, and the three of us spent 4 hours in the barn, working to save both mother and calf. I had never seen anything like it. Ruth Sanchez was calm and focused, her hands steady as she worked to reposition the calf for delivery. Dennis Stewart held the cow still and talked to her in a low, soothing voice. And I did whatever they told me to do, fetching supplies and holding lights and trying not to get in the way. When the calf finally slipped free, wet and steaming in the cold barn air, I thought my heart was going to burst. The mother cow immediately started licking her baby clean, and within minutes the calf was trying to stand on shaky legs. It was like watching a miracle happen right in front of me. "You did good," Ruth Sanchez told me as we cleaned up. Frank would have been proud. That night, I called Kenneth Phillips to tell him about the calf. He laughed and said it sounded like I was becoming a real rancher. But more than that, I called to ask him about something that had been bothering me. "Kenneth," I said, "why did not anyone try to contact me when Frank was still alive? Why did it take him dying for me to find out about this place?" Kenneth Phillips was quiet for a long time. "Frank tried Matthew," he said finally. "He hired lawyers, private investigators, anyone who might be able to track you down. But the system protected your privacy. Your records were sealed. Your placements were confidential. Every time Frank got close, he hit another wall." "But why?" I asked. "Why did he keep trying?" "Because he loved you," Kenneth Phillips said simply. "Because you were his family, and family does not give up on family, even when it seems hopeless." I hung up the phone and sat on the front porch, looking out over the ranch that was mine now. The calf and its mother were in the barn, safe and warm. The other cattle were settled for the night. The horses were dozing in the corral. Everything was peaceful and quiet, and exactly as it should be. For the first time since I had arrived, I let myself believe that this was real, that this place was mine, that these people cared about me, that I had finally found where I belonged. It was a terrifying and wonderful feeling, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you could fly. The next morning, Dennis Stewart brought his wife and kids out to see the new calf. His daughter, maybe 8 years old, squealed with delight when the calf nuzzled her hand. His son, a few years older, asked if he could help with the feeding. Watching them, I realized something I had never understood before. This was what family looked like. Not just the people you were born to, but the people who chose to be part of your life, who showed up when you needed them, who celebrated your victories and helped you through your failures. Dennis Stewart must have seen something in my face because he clapped me on the shoulder. "You are getting it," he said. "Frank always said this place was about more than just cattle and hay. It is about community, about being part of something bigger than yourself." Spring turned to summer, and I learned the rhythm of ranch life. Early mornings checking on the animals, long days in the hayfields, evenings spent fixing whatever had broken during the day. My hands grew calloused and my shoulders broadened, and I stopped looking like someone who had spent his life indoors. Hannah Cox taught me about feed ratios and breeding schedules. Ruth Sanchez showed me how to give vaccinations and treat minor injuries. Julie Wilson fed me breakfast every Saturday and told me stories about my grandfather that made me laugh and cry at the same time. Slowly, carefully, I was becoming part of the community that had welcomed me. But the real change happened inside the house. In the quiet moments when I was alone with Frank Taylor's letters and my mother's belongings, I started to understand the shape of the family I had never known, the love that had existed even when I could not feel it, the way grief and regret could be transformed into something beautiful if you were willing to do the work. I found more letters, hidden in books and tucked into drawers. Letters Frank had written to me on my birthdays, on holidays, on ordinary Tuesdays when he was missing me particularly hard. Letters he had written to my mother after she died, apologies and explanations, and desperate wishes that he could take back the words that had driven her away. Reading them was like putting together a puzzle, piece by piece, until I could see the whole picture. Frank Taylor had been a proud man who had made mistakes, but he had also been a loving man who had spent years trying to make things right. My mother had been headstrong and independent, but she had also been hurt and angry and maybe a little afraid of the love that came with so many conditions attached. They had both been human, both flawed, both trying their best in a situation that had no easy answers. And somehow their mistakes and regrets and unfulfilled dreams had led to this moment. To me standing in a kitchen that belonged to me now, reading letters that explained where I came from and why I mattered. One evening in late July, I was sitting on the front porch when a car pulled up the gravel drive. I did not recognize the vehicle, a small sedan with California plates. But when the driver got out, my breath caught in my throat. She looked like my mother, like the pictures on the dresser, but older, maybe 45, with the same dark hair and stubborn chin. "You must be Matthew," she said as she walked up the porch steps. "I am your aunt, your mother's sister. My name is Barbara Collins." I stared at her, confused. Barbara Collins was the librarian in town, the woman who had been ordering books for Frank. But this woman was different, nervous and uncertain in a way that the librarian never was. "I am sorry," she said, seeing my confusion. "I should have introduced myself properly when we met before. But I was not sure you were ready to hear about more family. Frank asked me to wait, to let you settle in first." More family. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had spent my entire life believing I was alone in the world, and now it turned out I had an aunt who lived right here in town, who had been watching me from a distance, waiting for the right moment to reveal herself. Barbara Collins, my aunt, sat down on the porch steps and began to tell me the story I had never heard. She and my mother had been close as children, but they had drifted apart as adults. When my mother moved to California, they had lost touch almost completely. Barbara had married Jeffrey Cox and taken his name, had built a life in Whitefish while my mother chased dreams in Los Angeles. "I did not even know you existed until Frank told me," she said. "Sarah never mentioned having a baby. We had not spoken in years. She had come back to Whitefish 5 years ago, after her husband died and she needed a fresh start. Frank had recognized her immediately, had told her about me, about how he had been searching for me since my mother died. They had become friends, then family of a sort, united by their shared regret over the relationships they had lost. "Frank asked me not to contact you directly," Barbara Collins said. "He thought it should come from him, that he owed you that much. But he also asked me to watch over you if anything happened to him, to be here when you were ready for more family." I did not know what to say. 23 years old, and I was still learning that I had people in the world who cared about me, who had been thinking about me, who wanted to be part of my life. "I have something for you," she said, reaching into her purse. "Letters from your mother. She wrote to me a few times after you were born, sent pictures. I kept everything, hoping someday I would have a chance to share them with you." The letters were short, written on hospital stationery and hotel letterhead, but they painted a picture of my mother I had never seen before. She wrote about how much she loved me, about how scared she was to be a single mother, about how she wished she could give me the stable life she had never had. She wrote about wanting to come home to Montana, about missing her father, about hoping that someday pride would matter less than family. "She was going to bring you home," Barbara Collins said quietly. "The last letter I got from her, she said she was saving money for a bus ticket. She wanted to make peace with Frank, wanted you to grow up knowing your family. But then she got sick, and there was no time." I sat there holding my mother's letters, understanding for the first time that the life I had lived was not the life she had planned for me. She had wanted me to have this, the ranch and the family, and the sense of belonging that I was just now learning to accept. "Why did not you try to find me after she died?" I asked. Barbara Collins looked down at her hands. "I tried," she said, "but I was nobody to you, legally speaking. Just a sister-in-law who had lost touch years before. The state would not tell me anything. Frank had more resources, more connections, but even he could not break through the bureaucracy." We sat in silence for a while, watching the sunset over the mountains. Finally, Barbara Collins stood up to leave. "I do not want to overwhelm you," she said. "I just wanted you to know that you have family here, that you are not as alone as you might think." After she left, I sat on that porch until well past midnight, reading my mother's letters and trying to understand how my life had brought me to this moment. 23 years of feeling like an outsider, like someone who did not quite fit anywhere. And it turned out I had been heading home for all along. The rest of the summer passed in a blur of hard work and small revelations. I learned to ride the horses, to fix fence posts, to read the weather signs that told you when to bring the cattle in from the high pastures. I learned to cook on the wood stove, to can vegetables from the garden, to split firewood for the Montana winter ahead. But more than that, I learned to be part of a community. I started going to the church socials, not because I was particularly religious, but because that was where people gathered to share news and help each other solve problems. I joined the volunteer fire department, partly because they needed the help and partly because Dennis Stewart said it was a good way to meet people and learn about the area. Barbara Collins became a regular visitor, stopping by once or twice a week to check on me and share stories about my mother and grandfather. She brought photo albums and letters and small mementos that helped me understand the family I had never known. Slowly, carefully, we built a relationship that neither of us had expected, but both of us needed. By September, when the leaves started to turn and the first frost warnings appeared on the radio, I felt like I had been living on the ranch my entire life. The work that had seemed impossible in the spring now felt natural, automatic. I could tell when a cow was off her feed just by looking at her. I could predict the weather by watching the way the horses behaved. I could fix almost anything that broke. And what I could not fix, Dennis Stewart or one of the other neighbors could teach me. But the real change was deeper than just learning to be a rancher. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Not just tolerated or temporarily housed, but truly welcomed and valued. When people in town saw me, they did not see a former foster kid or an ex-convict. They saw Frank Taylor's grandson, a young man who was working hard to honor his grandfather's legacy and build a life worth living. One evening in late September, Kenneth Phillips stopped by with news that would test everything I had learned about belonging and family and home. There had been a challenge to Frank Taylor's will, he said, a distant cousin from back east who claimed that the ranch should have gone to him as the closest living relative. It is probably nothing, Kenneth Phillips said, but we need to be prepared. He has hired a lawyer, and they are claiming that Frank was not of sound mind when he wrote the will, that he was unduly influenced by medication and grief. The legal battle lasted 3 months, and it was the longest 3 months of my life. There were depositions and hearings and meetings with lawyers who spoke in language I barely understood. The cousin, a man named Jeffrey Cox, who shared a name but nothing else with Hannah's husband, had never met Frank Taylor, but claimed that the ranch should go to blood family, not some stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. The people of Whitefish rallied around me in ways that still take my breath away. Dennis Stewart testified about my work ethic and dedication. Hannah Cox spoke about my commitment to learning and growing. Julie Wilson told the court about the Saturday mornings when I sat in her diner reading Frank's letters and crying over the grandfather I had never known. Barbara Collins testified about Frank's years-long search for me, about his desperate desire to make amends for the mistakes he had made with my mother. The judge ruled in my favor on a cold December morning, just as the first serious snow of the winter was beginning to fall. Frank Taylor had been of sound mind when he wrote his will, the judge said. He had every right to leave his property to whomever he chose, and his choice had been clear and deliberate and made with full knowledge of the consequences. I walked out of that courthouse with Kenneth Phillips and Barbara Collins, and for the first time since the legal challenge began, I let myself breathe. The ranch was mine, legally and completely, and no one could take it away from me. That night, the whole town seemed to show up at my door. Dennis Stewart brought a bottle of whiskey that had been aging in his barn for 10 years. Hannah and Jeffrey Cox brought a cake that said, "Welcome home" in blue frosting. Julie Wilson brought enough food to feed an army. Ruth Sanchez brought her guitar and led everyone in singing songs that I did not know but somehow felt familiar. We celebrated until well past midnight, and when everyone finally went home, I sat alone in Frank Taylor's kitchen, surrounded by the dishes and empty bottles and lingering warmth of people who had chosen to be my family. 5 years later, I am still here. The ranch is thriving, the cattle are healthy, and I have expanded into organic beef and farm-to-table sales that Frank probably never imagined. Dennis Stewart retired last year, and I hired his son to help with the daily operations. Barbara Collins and I have Sunday dinners together every week, and she has become the family I never knew I needed. I still have Frank Taylor's letters, all of them, and I read them sometimes when I need to remember where I came from and why I'm here. I have added my own letters to the collection, letters to my mother and grandfather, letters to the children I hope to have someday, letters that explain how love can survive separation and regret can be transformed into something beautiful. The barn still holds that 1957 Chevrolet, and I drive it to town every Saturday morning for breakfast at Julie Wilson's Diner. People wave when I drive by, and I wave back, and sometimes I still cannot believe that this is my life, that I am part of something bigger and better than I ever imagined possible. If you are watching this and you feel like you do not belong anywhere, like you are always on the outside looking and I want you to know that family is not just about blood. Family is about the people who choose to love you, who show up when you need them, who believe in you even when you do not believe in yourself. Sometimes family finds you in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes the best thing you can do is be open to the possibility that you are not as alone as you think you are. So tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what does home mean to you? Share this video if it touched your heart, and remember that everyone deserves a place where they belong, where they are valued, where they can build something that matters. Sometimes that place is where you started, and sometimes it is somewhere you never expected to find yourself. But it is out there, waiting for you, and you are worthy of finding it. Home is not just a place. It is a feeling, a sense of belonging that comes from being known and loved and accepted exactly as you are. And if you have not found that yet, do not give up. Keep looking, keep hoping, keep believing that somewhere out there is a place where you fit, where you matter, where you can finally stop running and start living.